Okay, so 15. The typological theory of species classifications, which has few adherent, which has few adherents. I think that's
Yep.
okay. Today distinguishes species solely on the basis of observable physical characteristics, such as plumage, color, adult size, or dental structure. So essentially, this is saying that species classification bases off of physical characteristics.
Yes, and adherence means supporters. So we're saying that the typological theory of species classifications, which has few supporters today, distinguishes species solely, so that's really strong, on the basis of observable physical characteristics. Pretty much that. So like this theory divides people up based on physical characteristics, and not very many people support this theory today. Cool.
Okay. However, there are many so-called sibling species, which are indistinguishable on the basis of their appearance, but cannot interbreed, and thus, according to mainstream biological theory of species classifications, are separate species. So essentially, this is saying that there are species out there that you can't distinguish them from appearance.
Yes.
And that they can't interbreed. So they're considered a separate species. Okay. Since the typological theory does not count sibling species as separate species, it is unacceptable. So it's saying that essentially typological, wait, hold on. So this would be the conclusion. Yeah. Yes, this would be the conclusion. That since the typological theory does not count sibling species as, yep. I would believe that this is.
What part of that sentence is the conclusion?
That I feel like his opinion is saying that since typological.
What does since introduce?
Oh wait, no, that'd be a premise.
Yep, but you're right. You're right on the right sentence. But since, for, and because introduce premises. So since the typological theory does not count sibling species as separate species,
it is unacceptable.
It is unacceptable as our conclusion. So we're saying that the typological theory is unacceptable because it doesn't count sibling species as separate species. And why does that matter? Because sibling species are indistinguishable on their appearance, but they're not able to interbreed because they're too close, but they are separate species. So they're wrong to this theory is wrong, essentially.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so what is the flaw here? Why is this? Because this is really bad reasoning.
Yeah, so the flaw would be that he's saying just because this theory doesn't count one specific set of species, the entire theory should be thrown away.
Yeah, and he's saying okay, and it doesn't really make sense because we're saying hey, there are many so-called sibling species which are indistinguishable on the basis of their appearance, but cannot interbreed, and thus, according to the mainstream biological theory, they are separate species. So we're saying hey, this theory says they are separate species, and so we say since they don't count them as separate species, they're unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of already had, this is really ironic that they had this question again in this section because we already kind of had a question flaw that did something similar.
Oh, okay. Wait, what question would that be?
I'll tell you after you think of it.
Okay.
So what is the issue here?
The reason our argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that. So this would be a role question again, right? Nope. Or no? This is a method of reasoning.
Nope. Okay, so if it says the reasoning in the argument is most vulnerable to the criticism, so what kind of question would that be?
Most vulnerable to criticism. So essentially, the reason argument. It wouldn't be a weakening question, would it? Oh no, a flaw question.
Yeah, if you thought of it as a weakening question, it wouldn't. That's not terrible, but yeah, it's technically a flaw question. So we're saying which one of these is the reason that it's flawed, or it is a flaw question, but if you're like, this is what this being true weakens the argument, the fact that it does that.
Okay.
So what is the gap between our reasoning and conclusion in this question?
The gap would be that.
Like, why are we saying that the typological theory is unacceptable?
Oh, because mainstream biological theory is saying that because the mainstream biological theory is essentially stating that theory of species. Would it be that because they're comparing mainstream biological theory and their species classifications to the typological theory species classification?
Yeah, we're saying that typological theory is wrong because it contradicts with the mainstream biological theory. Is that a good reason?
No. So the flaw would be that they're just comparing mainstream to something that's not mainstream.
Yeah, but like, what are they assuming? Like, what makes the mainstream biological theory true? Like, why is that one better?
Oh, nothing makes it true. Just because the saying is mainstream. Okay. Okay.
All right, so let's go into our answer choices then.
The argument does not evaluate all aspects of the typological theory. I don't feel like that this is the most vulnerable criticism.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that we don't like every single aspect. That's not our issue of why it's not we're not wrong to say it's unacceptable because we didn't analyze every single thing about it.
The argument confuses a necessary condition for species distinction with a sufficient condition for species distinction. I don't like this one. But every time I get this, like a question similar to this, I always get confused on it.
So what does necessary mean? What's a good word to replace it with?
Required.
Yes, I like the word needed, but yes.
Okay.
So this is essentially saying the argument confuses a needed condition. So the argument confuses something needed for species distinction with something sufficient or enough for that species distinction. Do we do that? Do we confuse something like a trait that we need to have with something that alone would guarantee it? No, we don't do that. We don't actually have necessary and sufficient conditions going on in our argument at all.
Okay. So then B would be wrong. Then C.
Yeah, we don't have conditional reasoning. Yeah, it's conditional reasoning just doesn't happen.
Okay. Then C. The argument in its attempt to refute one theory of species classification presumes the truth of an opposing theory. So I like C. So I'm gonna keep C.
Why do you like this one?
So this is kind of like how we just spoke before, where it's kind of throwing out one theory in support of an opposing theory to be true.
Excellent.
Then D, the argument takes a single fact that is incompatible with a theory as enough to show that theory to be false. The argument takes a single fact. I'm gonna keep D and come back to it. E, the argument does not explain why sibling species cannot interbreed. Then E is just out of scope. Okay, now I'm gonna take a single fact that is incompatible with a theory. So I feel like for D, the single fact would be that there's a so-called sibling species. And since that's incompatible with the typological theory, that they're using that as saying that's enough to show that this theory is unacceptable.
Excellent, yeah.
So I like, but let me look at C and see why C is wrong.
Oh wait, no, C is right, sorry.
It is right? Okay.
So D says the argument takes a single fact that is incompatible with the theory as enough to show the theory to be false. So what would be the single fact that is incompatible with a theory?
So would the single fact be that there are so-called sibling species that have which are indistinguishable between appearances, and because.
But is this necessarily a problem? Even though like, if a single fact proves something to be wrong, would that be a flaw?
No.
No, so this answer choice, even if this happens, this isn't describing a flaw. Like this would actually be valid. Like, hey, this can't be true because of this fact. Therefore, it can't,
Oh, okay.
right? That's not a flaw.
Okay,
It
that makes
does
sense.
happen. Yep, excellent.
So that would make C the correct answer. I wonder what I got for 15.
Yeah, I'm curious what you put for this one.